Robben Island. Conspiracies inside. And out the prison. Arrival on the island. Cold, stone, and silence. The boat ride to Robben Island was short, but its impact was permanent. As the coastline of Cape Town disappeared behind thick mist, Mandela stood handcuffed, silent, and watchful. The wind cut through his thin prison clothes, and the sound of the waves felt like a prelude to something darker. When the boat docked, a guard growled, "Welcome to the place where names die." He wasn't wrong. Robben Island was where the regime sent its greatest threats, not to punish them quickly, but to erase them slowly. Mandela was assigned to a tiny concrete cell with no bed, just a mat on the floor, a bucket for waste, and a barred window so narrow it barely let in light. The walls were painted a dull gray. The air was damp, and the silence suffocating. This wasn't prison. It was psychological warfare. Every sound outside his cell became a message. Every silence, a question. Has the world forgotten you yet? The guards were cold, calculated. Some insulted him by name. Others simply watched. Mandela realized something quickly. He was not there just to be imprisoned. He was there to be broken. And yet, even in that first night, sitting on the cold floor with aching knees and a mind swirling with unanswered fears, he whispered to himself, "They will not own my soul." Mandela would later describe that first night not just as the beginning of punishment, but as the moment when time itself stopped. Days melted into each other. Meals lost their taste. The absence of noise became deafening. Many men broke within weeks, not because they were physically tortured, but because they were forgotten. And in that darkness, Mandela found the seed of something that would carry him forward, a sense of inner command. If they couldn't reach his mind, they couldn't own him. He once whispered to a fellow inmate during morning duties, "They control the walls, but we control how we walk between them." It wasn't defiance in volume. It was defiance in posture, presence, and thought. Robben Island didn't just try to bury men. It tried to erase their shape. But Mandela was already rewriting his. Robben Island was built on layers of deception. Prisoners were divided by category, ideology, and influence. Not all were comrades. Some were informants, planted among the cells to observe, report, and if necessary, manipulate. Mandela understood quickly. His enemy wasn't just outside the cell. It could be across the hall, or worse, sharing his work shift in the limestone quarry. The quarry was brutal. Prisoners worked with picks and shovels under a blinding sun, crushing stones that served no purpose except to wear them down. There, Mandela noticed patterns. Certain inmates avoided punishment. Some were allowed to rest. One, in particular, always seemed to disappear before something bad happened. Mandela said nothing, but he watched. And what he saw made him rethink every conversation, every nod, every shared glance. There was one morning when the quarry fell unusually silent. A rumor had spread that an inmate had been transferred suddenly, without reason, without notice. Mandela watched the guards closely. One of them smiled too easily. Later that week, a coded message passed to him revealed the truth. The missing inmate had been planted by the authorities all along. For months, every movement, every coded word shared within earshot had been recorded. Mandela didn't panic. He simply began again, this time with stricter layers of secrecy, deeper silence, and a clearer sense of who he could trust. Guards, too, had layers. Some were cruel by nature. Others pretended kindness, but reported every word. One officer often handed Mandela books, only to later use the same passages against him in interrogations. Even the warden, who occasionally allowed small freedoms, had a file thicker than most politicians. Mandela was surrounded by traps, and he knew it. So he adapted. He spoke less, observed more. He developed a neutral tone, a calm presence, and an internal filter stronger than steel. He realized leadership here wasn't about commands. It was about stability, being the center of calm in a whirlwind of fear. The men around him began to notice. Mandela didn't just survive. He balanced the room, and that made him more dangerous than ever. Robben Island did not need chains to isolate a man. Words were enough. Or rather, the absence of them. Letters were Mandela's only lifeline to the outside world. He was allowed to send and receive a few each year, censored, redacted, and often delayed without explanation. But over time, patterns emerged. Replies didn't match the questions he had sent. Family members referenced letters he never wrote. Allies responded to words he hadn't shared. And Mandela understood something or someone was altering his voice. He began testing the system. He would include coded phrases, subtle references only his wife or comrades would understand. If the phrases came back unmentioned, he knew the letters had been intercepted. If they were misquoted, he knew they had been rewritten. Some letters arrived with full paragraphs missing. Others arrived with new paragraphs added. His own words had become weapons, used against him, bent by invisible hands. The betrayal wasn't just bureaucratic. It was intimate. One day, Mandela received a note supposedly from an ANC affiliate. The tone was cold, dismissive. Something felt off. After months of digging through indirect mentions from new prisoners, he discovered the truth. That message wasn't from the ANC at all. It was written by a government agent, designed to sow doubt and fracture alliances. Still, Mandela never reacted emotionally. Instead, he began documenting everything in his mind. Every date, every change, every silence. And from this internal record, he built something stronger than paper, memory as resistance. His allies outside the prison may have been silenced, but inside, Mandela sharpened a weapon the regime couldn't confiscate: clarity. Thank you for staying with us this far. If you're still watching, you're not just a viewer. You're walking inside the mind of a man who refused to be erased. And now ask yourself, if your words were taken, would you still find a way to speak? Because in the chapters ahead, Mandela doesn't just survive the silence. He transforms it into the most powerful message of his life. What happens next reveals not just who he was, but who we all can become under pressure. Despite the guards' attempts to isolate prisoners, Mandela and others developed a secret communication system that turned the prison itself into a network. They scratched codes beneath beds, folded paper into hollowed books, and whispered messages while working shoulder to shoulder in the quarry. Even food trays became messengers, notes wrapped in crumbs, symbols scratched into the wood. At first, it was simple: updates from different prison blocks, news of arrests or releases. But as trust grew, so did the complexity. They began coordinating intellectual resistance, discussing ideology, challenging one another's strategies, testing ideas for what a post-apartheid South Africa could be. They debated democracy, ethics, and forgiveness. And all of it, every profound idea, had to be transmitted in silence. Mandela once carved a quote from Marcus Aurelius into the underside of a bench in the courtyard. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. It wasn't just philosophy, it was a warning to his brothers. Every word, every glance, every hesitation mattered. Prison guards couldn't read that language, but the inmates could. He taught them to notice patterns in footsteps, subtle changes in routines, even the folding of laundry as a signal. Robben Island became a symphony of subtle rebellion, orchestrated one silent cue at a time. Even guards began to sense that something was happening beneath the surface. But they couldn't stop it, because it was invisible, unspoken, and everywhere. The regime believed that exile would erase Mandela's influence. But in truth, it amplified it. Through silent acts of discipline, routine, and presence, he became a living symbol. He woke early, kept his cell clean, exercised, meditated. Not to please the guards, but to remain intact. When others broke, Mandela stayed still. When despair crept in, he offered a glance or a word that reminded men of who they were. Guards began to whisper about him. New prisoners arrived already calling him Tata. Even some officers lowered their voices when addressing him, not out of respect, but because they sensed something unshakable. He did not beg. He did not rage. And that quiet defiance became contagious. Years passed. The world outside changed. But inside, Mandela transformed his cell into a command center, not of power, but of principle. He taught the men to think long-term, to visualize freedom, to prepare mentally and spiritually for the country they would one day rebuild. This was the invisible rebellion, not riots, not escapes, but dignity, intelligence, and endurance in the face of a system built to crush the soul. And though the regime locked the man, they could never touch what he had become. Mandela's rebellion wasn't waged with weapons. It was built in silence, cemented by routine, and carried in the posture of a man who refused to vanish. Day by day, he rebuilt himself from the inside out. And through his quiet example, others followed, not because they were told to, but because they saw what unshakable dignity looked like. To some, he was just another prisoner. To others, he had become a myth. But to the men locked in those cells, he was proof that the human spirit could stretch beyond concrete walls. Years later, one of the prison guards would confess, "We were supposed to watch him, but in the end, he watched us, and we changed." So now the question becomes, when he finally walked free, what kind of man emerged? Now that you've seen the inside of Robben Island, tell us, what would you have done in Mandela's place? Would you have held on to your identity in silence or broken under pressure? Subscribe to follow this unforgettable series. And don't miss the next episode. The presidency, the man who had to choose between the nation and his family.